the harm, because then they become numb to terror. If you always keep people anxious, then it's a far more effective way to control them. He wrote it to basically brag about how brilliant he is in terrorizing people and so on. Now, so it looked quite grim, and I think and this is why you found so many Egyptians, especially Egyptians who were talented, gifted in a variety of ways, give up and leave the country. I mean, Egypt has about, estimates vary, but 8 to 10 million people who are expatriates living somewhere. And at the same time, Egyptian immigrants overall tend to be economically and socially quite successful. So the percentage of Egyptian immigrants that are doctors or engineers, or people like Zuhail, who won the Nobel Prize, he's in Caltech, for some remarkable inventions or discoveries, and he is likely to win a second Nobel. Or like Farouk al-Baz, who played a very critical role in the Apollo missions. Or there's an Egyptian economist, I now forget his name, was for a long time an advisor to the White House on some major economic issues. And of course, some of the very heartbreaking stories is when some of these Egyptians would get it in their crazy mind that maybe we can go back and do something good for our country of origin, and they would go back only to be frustrated with absolute corruption and so on. So now, how did we get from there, from this sort of grim picture, to a revolution, and I believe it is a revolution and not an uprising or riots or whatnot, in Tunisia and then in Egypt. I remember when the Tunisian revolution took place, immediately various pundits started theorizing, and as you know from my last lecture, I could go on forever about how ignorant people who should not say anything decide to pontificate about either Islam or the Arab world or so on. The pundits kept saying, well, but Tunisia, the people in Tunisia are educated, Egypt, the rate of illiteracy is high, and it's completely different. Egypt is secularized and westernized, Egypt is not, so on and so forth. Of course, as usual, they were missing everything. The reality, though, is that there were several political elements shared by Tunisia, Egypt, and Iran. Tunisia, right at the wake of the French Revolution, was going through its own indigently, natively generated constitutional reformation under the leading figure of Khairuddin al-Tunisi, who was fired and then ended up being exiled by French forces. Egypt had gone through several major constitutional movements. The major one, and the one that you hear cited in these in the current uprisings most, is the 1919 revolution, which sought to impose constitutional limitations on monarchy and on British forces. It was suppressed violently. And then, of course, Iran, various developments culminating in the Mossadegh 1950s constitutional reformation. Now, Egypt, though, other than the shared legacy of intellectual ideas, which which had already made the leap into a discourse of rights and liberty and a form of the idea of a representative government, an idea of limited government. Various events in all three countries, Tunisia, Egypt, Iran, completely buried and for a while even looked like completely obliterated these historical experiences. Especially and particularly with the after the colonial period and the end of colonialism, the rise of puritanical Islamic movements that, to say the least, the ideas of Khaled al-Tunisi or the ideas of Naini in Iran, who was one of the major thinkers of the constitutional heritage in Iran, or the ideas of Muhammad Abdu and so on, or the ideas of someone like Kawakabi, meant nothing to them. Even more so, they were quite hostile to that tradition. And there's a very fundamental paradigm at play here, is that the conceptions which George Maqdisi has coined Islamic humanism, a puritanical tradition that exists in Islam and a humanist tradition that exists in Islam, and people like Khaled al-Tunisi and Muhammad Abdu and so on and so forth had succeeded for their time, and I emphasize for their time, in co-opting Islamic textual doctrine or Islamic textual Islamic text, Islamic doctrine, Islamic catechisms, Islamic dogma, to refurnish, reconstruct, reinvent it into a notion of whether rights or limited government or even the classical Islamic division of rights, that rights are divided into two types, the rights of God and the rights of human beings. And people like Muhammad Abdu and so on, these critical figures in the 19th century and the early 20th century, or Naini in Iran, took the classical discourse on the rights of God versus rights of people and co-opted an orientation with this discourse, an orientation, for instance, that said between are governments duty-bound to discharge the rights of people or the rights of God? And that tradition said that governments are duty-bound to discharge the rights of people because God can vindicate God's own rights in the hereafter. So it's like God can do well for himself, human beings need the help, right? So Khaled al-Tunisi and Muhammad Abdu and Naini and so on took this idea, remingled it, put it into interaction, into a dynamic, into even a dialectical with a Western European humanistic thought to come up with formulations that were quite powerful and quite compelling. Their ideas, however, were aborted, in my view, quite powerfully by the rise of puritanical movements of the 70s and 80s and so on. Now, the Mubarak government and Zain al-Abidin in Tunisia had done something that Shah had also tried to do in Iran, but unsuccessfully, is that by waging an all-out war against Islamists, their mantra was an all-out war against all Islamists, whether they are puritanical or frankly, part of it is that people like Zain al-Abidin or the members of Mubarak's government do not have the sufficient engagement with their own tradition to know the difference between one Islamic thinker and another. I mean, if you come to them and you say something like, is there something such as the tradition of the ethics of Al-Razi as opposed to the ethics of Al-Ghazali, they would draw a complete blank. I mean, you're lucky if they heard of Al-Razi or Ghazali at all. The military education was designed to make sure that they stay within a certain system of loyalty, and that system of loyalty could not be, at least in the view of the people who constructed these modern militaries, could not be threatened by a dynamic engagement with their own tradition or an informed engagement with their own tradition. Two things: the puritanical experience of the 70s, 80s, and also 90s proved to be very bruising and extremely alienating, and the government did those who led the Tunisian Revolution and the Egyptian Revolution an unintended favor, in that by eliminating the Islamic Puritans from the sort of political field, it allowed, and I emphasize inadvertently, it allowed for a very new phenomena and a very modern phenomena and a very technological phenomena. And a phenomena that you would, if you would visit Tunisia last summer, or you visit Egypt last summer, you're struck by it immediately. In Egypt, for instance, the most lucrative type of honest business you can open was to create an internet cafe, bring computers, and I'm telling you, they're crowded. I mean, you have to book a place, and I mean, so many of my friends were trying to convince me to become rich by opening up an internet. I wish I did, frankly, because academics are not smart when it comes to money, and so. But again, quite a few of my more enterprising friends did become well off. So the net, in numerous ways, with the Puritan discourse shrunk and weakened, and also discredited through a variety of means, such as the sheer ugliness of the violence and suffering that it generated, its oppressive attitude towards women. Many of these internet cafes, 50% of the people sitting there are women, and women that are very much a part of the modern age. And one interesting sidebar from anecdotal personal experience is that my book, The Great Theft, when it was translated to Arabic, being not a very cheerful person by nature, I thought that, God, it's not going to sell much, and I'll be lucky if there are 1,000 people read it. And quite frankly, when Madboudi published it, and he asked me about profits, my royalties, right? I told Madboudi idiotically, don't worry about it. He said, no, you need royalties. I said, okay, give me £500 now. He gave me £500, I went and bought books with it. And then I learned last summer that it has sold close to 100,000 copies. Can you imagine if I had any sense? It became a bestseller. And The Great Theft, which is no secret,